Today we're going to be learning how to use a masking fluid or a masking tape. You can see here after you add the masking fluid or masking tape down onto the paper, on top of your painting or on top of white paper, you can add a wash, which means you're just adding a background, a large amount of paint on top. And you can add anything on top, details or a background. And then after it dries completely, after about an hour, you can peel that masking fluid up or that masking tape away and revealing what's underneath, the clean painting or the clean white paper. Then you can paint back on top of that white paper as you see here, or you can reveal the painting that's underneath, or you can even leave the paper white if that's what you're looking for. Now, whenever you're using masking fluid or any kind of watercolor paper, before you get started, you always want to stretch your paper onto a board. When you're using watercolor paper, if it gets wet at all, it's going to warp up and it's going to get wavy and all bumpy. So I'm going to stretch my paper. I'm going to use a masking tape here to stretch it along the edges. I want to make sure that this tape is straight and that each side has the same amount cut off. This will create a nice border around this whenever I'm finished. If you accidentally make a mess with the India inks, as you see I just did, go ahead and clean it up. These are a little bit difficult to clean up after they dry, so it's definitely easier to just go ahead and clean it up while it's still wet. After you have it cleaned up, if you make a mess, hopefully you don't like me, then we can get started with the masking fluid. If you want to create a drawing first with pencil or pen, anything of that sort, you can. If you use pencil, you want to make sure to erase it away. This will soften your lines and make it to where they're not seen as much when the painting process is done. You can see here I'm starting to apply the masking fluid. I'm using a stylus. This is a metal stylus. It has a little ball on the end of it, and it's metal, and so it's easier to clean up. Some people use paintbrushes to add their masking fluid, but it will ruin that paintbrush. So you want to make sure that it's a cheap paintbrush, but really this metal stylus works better. You can also use a dip pen if you want, like an ink dip pen. But I want to show you these metal styluses. I get these at Hobby Lobby or Michael's, or you can even get them on Amazon. They're not too expensive. You can see here I got 3 of them for $3, so $1 a piece. And that allows me to have something that I can apply this masking fluid with and also clean easily. Here I am. I'm going to go ahead and show you some examples of how you can also use a dip pen. You want to make sure that you're careful with this whenever you're applying it. It's hard to get the masking fluid off if you make a mistake. So take your time, make sure that you are only putting it places that you want it to be. If you have a large area that you need to cover up with masking fluid, consider using a blue tape or a painter's tape. I didn't have any blue tape with me whenever I was making this video, so I just risked it and put down the masking tape. And this was not a good idea because I'm going to wind up ripping my paper in the end. Make sure that it's a painter-friendly tape, that it's that blue tape or the green frog tape. That will save your artwork in the end. But if you have a large mass that you need to cover up, consider using the tape instead of masking fluid. It'll be faster, it'll be cheaper, it'll be easier. And then whenever you apply the masking fluid for the fine, small details, just make sure to overlap the edges of that tape. That will cover it up just the same as if you use masking fluid everywhere. You'll need to give the masking fluid about 15 minutes to dry. Try to check it after 15 minutes. Ideally, give it even 20, and that'll give it time to dry. And then once it's completely dry, we can add a wash on top of this. That's what I'm going to do here. I'm using an India ink, and I'm going to use a couple different brands. All of them are good, the Bombay or the Liquitex or any of the others. They all work well. You'll notice that the India inks are a little bit stronger than watercolor. They're a little bit more vibrant, and they hold their color a little better. They don't fade quite as much. I want you to start off by adding just clear water onto your entire background. We're going to do a wet on wet with this India ink, so wet paper with wet ink on top. And so I made sure to go over it a couple times with just clear water, and now I'm applying that India ink on top. You can see that that water absorbs it and really lets it spread throughout the paper. This can be a cool technique to just let it dry that way, but I'm going to allow this entire paper to be filled. I went almost all the way down with the blue, and then I'm coming up with the green, letting them kind of mix in the middle. Play with the colors, do whatever you want to do on yours. You can add different variations of this however you want. We're going to need to let this dry for about 30 minutes to even a couple hours before you remove the masking fluid. Depending on how wet you made your paper, it may even stay wet and not ready to do this process for even 2, 3, 4 hours. So you really got to wait quite a while to let it completely dry. If you'll feel it with the back of your hand, if it feels cold, it's too early. You don't need to take the masking fluid off. You'll rip it as you try to take it off. But once it's completely dry, you can just rub it off with your finger, as you saw I just did. And then you can go back in with an India ink or a watercolor or any kind of medium that you want, even a gouache or something of that sort. And you can paint on pure white paper. And it's more vibrant. It shows up better that way. So this works really well with watercolor and really well with India inks. And I highly encourage you to try to think of ways that you can use this other than just this little learning technique today. On this paper, I first did a wash. I didn't add any of the masking fluid. I did a blue and green wash of India ink and then let that completely dry. And then I added a masking fluid of just some stripes, and then I let that completely dry. And now I'm adding a second layer on top of those. I'm doing a sparkly, glittery India ink here, but I'm not loving the color, so I'm going to add in some purple here, and that's going to really make this look a little darker, a little bit more rich, and I really like the results. Once it completely dried, I rubbed away the masking fluid that I added on top, and you'll see that initial painting show through better now. So you can see that she's painted over all the masking fluid, and then you just come in and you rub off that masking fluid, and it leaves that nice crisp white paper there. What's also really awesome about this is if you wanted to go back in and paint that letter yellow, you could do that. But if you were trying to paint yellow on top of this blue in watercolor, that's not gonna work, okay? That might work in acrylic, but it wouldn't work in watercolor. So the colors layer and see through, they're more transparent.